Resiliency and families working and learning together. My name is Vicki Clark. I'm the Executive Director of the Cape May County Chamber Education Foundation. And on behalf of our President, Amy Mahon, who was unable to join us today, we welcome everyone. Amy sends her greetings to all as we dive into this critically important program. We're extremely grateful to our partners in offering this webinar, the Greater Atlantic City Chamber of Commerce and their President, Michael Chait, and the Southern Ocean County Chamber and their president, Lori Pepinella. Thank you so much for partnering with us and spreading the word on this very important topic. I'd also like to give a big shout out and thank you to our sponsor, Ocean Inc. Community Action Partnership, and thank them very much for supporting our webinar. Before we get into the program, I'd like to acknowledge that we did have a slight little program change, and Joe Faldetta will be moderating our panel instead of Katie Faldetta, who had the wonderful opportunity to attend her nephew's graduation in person today. So that was just an opportunity that she could not pass up, and we totally support her being there to support him and his accomplishments. With that, I'm going to turn the program in just a moment to our first speaker, but I want to ask everyone to, as the program proceeds, if you have any questions, you can use the chat feature at the bottom of your screen. Just type your questions in the chat as we move along. You will be able to use the raised hand feature at the end of the program as well if you'd like to ask your question in person. But as we move through the topic, as you think of a question you'd like to ask of a specific one of the speakers, you can put in the chat, this question is for Michael, this question is for Joe, or whoever the speaker is, and what that question is. So with that, I am going to turn the program over to our first speaker today, Michael McKnight, who is an education specialist with the New Jersey Department of Education. Michael, thank you so much. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Vicki. Everyone, welcome this morning. I'm excited about getting to spend some time with everyone. Yes, a little bit about me. I currently work for the New Jersey Department of Education in the Cape May County office. And prior to that, I was a teacher and an administrator with what I call troubled kids, at-risk kids, usually removed from regular schools. So I taught for 13 school years, and then I was a principal in a school district for a little bit over a decade. So it's always fun to get to share with others some of the things that troubled kids have taught me over the years. And we're excited about sharing some of the things that we're learning about the brain, stress, and learning that are not just for teachers, but for parents, for employees, for people that are running companies. So we're excited about being able to share that with everyone. I'm going to let Lori introduce Lori, and then I'll get started.
Welcome, everybody, and I'm so excited to share briefly this morning. It's just going to be really pretty quick overview, but I want to thank everybody, just all the sponsors for this and your hard work in putting this together. So I do teach at Butler University right now, and Joe is one of my graduate students, and Natalia is one of my graduate students. And they are actually going through the certification in what we're going to talk about today. It's called Applied Educational Neuroscience. And so I'm a former special education teacher, former school counselor. I worked at Methodist Hospital here in Indianapolis. It's a large hospital, worked on the adolescent psychiatric unit as a school liaison for that unit. And I'm a mom of 3 young adult children now, and I would have been a very different parent had I known what I know today. So this is really what, Michael just said. It's about every aspect of life. What we are going to be talking about today is about our personal lives. It's about our professional work, and you'll never, ever, and Joe, you'll attest to this, Natalia, you'll attest this, once you're exposed to this, you never look at any experience without thinking about the brain and the body. So anyway, welcome everybody. Thank you.
So I'm going to get started with sharing my screen. And we'll get started. I want to take just a back up a little bit picture of where we are and what is going on as we are dealing with all kinds of different issues today. So let's get started. Pandemic stress. Way back on Wednesday, March 18th, 2020, New Jersey closed all its public schools, its private schools, and universities. Also, a statewide stay-at-home order and closure of all non-essential retail businesses occurred that day. That day was 218 days ago. So we continue to have our environments changed quite drastically up until today and including today. Just real quickly, where we're at least October 21st, COVID-19 and the stress of our pandemic. We're currently at over 8 million cases in the United States, over 226,000 deaths, and some of the good news is over 5 million folks have recovered from the virus to date. The coronavirus to date has killed more Americans than the Vietnam War, the Gulf War, the Afghanistan War, and the Iraq War combined. Getting closer to home, some quick numbers about New Jersey as of October 21st. Bit over 226,000 confirmed cases in our state, over 16,000 deaths. And taking a look at some of the numbers from Atlantic and Cape May County. I'm going to jump down to Cape May. As of October 20th, a bit over 1,400 confirmed cases in our county, 103 deaths, and 101 active cases to date. So I want to introduce a term called collective trauma. A collective trauma is a traumatic psychological effect shared by a group of people of any size, up to and including an entire society, or in this case, planet. Traumatic events witnessed by an entire society can stir up collective sentiment, often resulting in a shift in that society's culture, as well as its mass actions. A sample of some well-known historical collective traumas from the past would include things like the Holocaust, the Armenian genocide, slavery in the United States, the atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the Trail of Tears, the attack on Pearl Harbor, the September 11th, 2001 attacks on the United States, and right now, we are experiencing a worldwide collective trauma. Oh, sorry about that. So who is at risk? Everyone is at risk during this time. Everyone reacts differently to stressful situations. Within the general public, including those who never acquire the virus, the overall lifestyle change and the fear that we are managing on a daily basis may lead to a trauma response. Fear and anxiety about a disease can be overwhelming and cause strong emotions in adults and children. Adding to the stress level is the unpredictability of when things may return to normal. Whoops. So some of the challenges of working and parenting during a pandemic. The coronavirus pandemic hasn't been easy on anyone, but one group of people that really feel the burden are parents and guardians, as well as workers. Parenting has its challenges even under normal circumstances. With schools closed or doing hybrid learning and many people working from home, it's becoming increasingly difficult for people to balance their work life and parenting as remote learning has become more widespread. For parents who are essential workers, school closures have raised issues surrounding childcare in our country. This has put increasing levels of stress on employers, workers, parents, children, and everyone. Some other statistics currently as of October 1st. Unemployment in New Jersey, more than 27,000 new claims were filed for the week ending September 26th, bringing the total to 1.63 million New Jersey workers who have filed claims since the coronavirus pandemic forced major shutdowns of our businesses and restaurants in mid-March. It's the first time new filings have exceeded 25,000 since mid-August. Our preliminary unemployment rates in Cape May County as of August were a little bit over 11%. So work, stress, and COVID. The disruption that came with shifting work from the office to home, something unimaginable 5 or 10 years ago, has contributed to stress. Just shy of 1 in 4 US workers were still working at home in August, down from 35% in May, according to the US Department of Labor. Before the pandemic, fewer than 5% of workers worked remotely. Before COVID-19, 62% of employees reported positive mental health, but that has dropped now to around 28%. Job satisfaction has also fallen according to research, from 57% to 32%, and job motivation has fallen also around the same percentages. A strategic market research firm, Martech, found that 42% of workers report increased stress levels and worsening focus at work. So what does this all mean? Well, certainly stressed families result in stressed workers and stressed children. The current pandemic has led to a vulnerability in all of us. When stress is predictable, moderate, and controlled, it can actually build resiliency. However, the stress we are experiencing with the current pandemic is unpredictable, severe, and prolonged, leading all of us to experience what is being called pandemic fatigue. And I believe, all of us are experiencing that stress level, and just a little bit more going into stress, because there's not a lot of difference between stress and trauma. So quickly, there are 3 levels of stress, and not all stress is bad. Positive stress responses are normal and an essential part of healthy development, and they are characterized by brief increases in heart rate, mild elevation in our hormonal levels. Some situations that might trigger a positive stress response are the first day with a new job or a first experience of any kind. Positive stress is very good for us. We learn to build our resilience through those positive stresses. The next level of stress is tolerable stress. Tolerable stress responses activate the body's alarm system to a greater degree as a result of more severe, long-lasting difficulties, such as the loss of a loved one, a natural disaster, or a frightening injury. If the activation is time limited and buffered by close relationships, the brain and other organs recover from what might otherwise be damaging effects. And then lastly, there's toxic stress responses, which can occur when a person experiences strong, frequent, or prolonged adversity, such as physical or emotional abuse, substance abuse, or mental illness, or accumulated burdens of family economic hardship without adequate support. The current pandemic causes an extreme level of stress within our brains and bodies. So it might be an interesting thing for you to do while I finish up, to kind of just gauge your stress level and your employee stress level through these three varieties of stress, and see where most of the people in your life are as in regards to stress. Stressed brains simply do not learn. Stressed brains do not work at optimal levels, and the brain learns and works best in a state of relaxed alertness. So the stress has an effect on our ability to both parent, learn, and work. So here are some symptoms of toxic stress that many may be experiencing. Feeling uncertain, nervous, or anxious, lacking motivation, feeling tired, overwhelmed, or burned out, feeling sad or depressed, having trouble sleeping, having trouble concentrating, feeling irritation, anger, or in denial. All of these can lead, are sources of stress and also symptoms of stress, and often can be masked by quick anger responses or hostility. So if you look at this slide real quickly, you can see a healthy nervous system in this range on the left-hand side, with normal everyday up and down. And then you can look at, on the right-hand side, some symptoms of undischarged traumatic stress. The graph on the right of your screen shows a dysregulated nervous system that can get stuck on or stuck on off, or vacillate between the two. When our systems are stuck on, anxiety, panic, hyperactivity, inability to relax, hypervigilant, a sense of restlessness and uneasiness, and quick to anger and rage can be part of the symptoms as our stress response systems become overwhelmed. When our systems are stuck on off, we can see that more flat affect, chronic fatigue, depressed, disoriented, feeling numb. So we really want to be in touch with what are we feeling, what are our employees feeling, and how best can we get ourselves regulated so we can function during this time. So I want to define resiliency. Resilience is the human capacity to face, overcome, and ultimately be strengthened by life's adversities and challenges. This is not something some people have and some people do not. Resilience is learnable and teachable. There is an increasing recognition that the current global pandemic requires what we might call everyday resiliency. That the capacity to be resilient is a critical factor in sustaining our ability to thrive within the current environment we are all working and living in, and that resilience can be developed. So quickly, before I begin to turn it over to Lori, quick ways that we can calm our brain and nervous system include breath, movement, connections with others, a predictable routine and rituals in our daily lives, upholding regular sleeping patterns, and certainly having some fun. Fun is a great stress reducer, and we want to, at times when often the last thing we think about is fun, make sure we have some fun with both our employees and our own kids. So ways that we can begin to cultivate workplace resilience include, first, the creation of safety. As leaders, we need to focus on prioritizing physical, emotional, and psychological safety in every interaction and process. We need to be able to, too, create structure and keep structure and predictability. Keeping your meetings, honoring your staff by being punctual and predictable. Routines calm the nervous system. Ensure that supervisors are checking in with staff often, asking how they are doing and what they need. Ensure someone is checking in on you too. Some trust and transparency also critical during high stress periods. Trust is imperative in our organizations, especially during times of uncertainty and fear. Build trust by practicing intentional relationship building and even over communicating and sharing as much important information as possible. And lastly, voice and choice. Everyone needs to feel seen and to know their options. When possible, seek staff input in planning or changing team and organizational processes. Offer options when possible for alternating work schedules based on staff needs. Our overall goal, and some of the things that Lori will be going over with us next, is to get all of ourselves in the yellow zone here of the window of tolerance. You can see here quickly, the top area in pink, that's hyperarousal. The fight-flight response has kicked in. And then you'll see in the blue, the hypoarousal, the freeze response. What we want to be able to do with staff, with our families, with our workers, is offer them ways to keep themselves emotionally regulated. And that's what we are going to talk about for the rest of our time. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Lori.
Thank you, Michael. So right now, let's just, I'd like for everybody just to stand up and stretch. We've already been sitting for about 35, 40 minutes, and I want you to take a couple of the deepest breaths. Bring that breath all the way down to your belly. Try not to move your shoulders, but just bring that air, that oxygen all the way down to your belly, and then a slower exhale. Take about 2 or 3 deep, deep breaths. And when you feel all stretched out and you're ready, you can have a seat. This is going to be pretty quick. I guess I won't be able to see the time. So will someone tell me when we have to stop at what? At 11 for the panel?
Yeah, so you have about a half hour. I'll keep you on.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to open up with this. This is my website. And the reason I went to this section, I went under resources here. These are weekly parent and educator brain and body wellness practices that are for all of you. I've done 5 weeks worth of these, and I've been sharing these with parents during the March, April, and May, and then we've extended these, to educators. It's for adult brain and body states. So they're not long. They address their regulatory practices. And there's some videos that go with these. So I kind of explain so you can kind of see what these are. But anyway, this is Revelations in Education. And I think I won't be able to get to a lot of these practices today. So I want you to have this resource. I'm going to pull up my PowerPoint. And we'll start here. So this is going to go pretty quick. So what we are, when I introduced myself, I would have been a different mom. This really applies to every aspect in our life. And what we're talking about when we are attending and attuning to adversity and trauma and to toxic levels of stress that we all carry, we're looking at this framework, and it's not a program. It's literally a framework that supports us in how we take care of ourselves, in how we share our calm nervous system, which is co-regulation. Touch points are moments of connection. So these are built in to our routines as parents in our place of work. Just checking in, the way you greet someone, the way you look at someone, your tone of voice matters. And we know that 93% of communication is nonverbal. The fourth pillar is really teaching our students and staff and parents and communities, giving them the science beneath their brain and body states. I am exhausted from talking about behaviors. And so we aren't doing that through this framework. We are really addressing where that child, adolescent, or that adult is in brain and body state. So this is just kind of an overview of this framework. These are some practices that were just published in Edutopia for adults. I'm sorry, I'm ahead of myself. This is from Dr. Ian McGilchrist's work, and it's called A Meaning Crisis. This is what Michael's talking about when he talked today about looking at this collective trauma. And what we're seeing right now is a meaning crisis that calls us to really communicate with one another, to bring out the best in one another. And it gives us an opportunity to belong, to really begin to shift our perspectives and to really reframe what we're seeing. And we've talked about this in our graduate certification class, that really our perceptions drive everything. How you see an experience, how then you think about it and how you feel about it is so significant in moment by moment and day by day, those times of healing and repairing the trauma that we've experienced. So as we think about the two conditions that the brain absolutely has to have to live well, to learn well, to teach well, to parent well, to lead well, those conditions align with brain development. And the very first condition I want to speak to you this morning about is safety. And it's, this is extremely important because to feel safe is unique to each individual. How you feel in an environment that you are in is really sharing where you're functioning in your brain and body. So feeling safe and feeling connected. Feeling connected is feeling felt by another. And the brain develops from the very back to the front and from the inside out. So safety is really the language and the condition of our bodies, not just the brainstem, but our bodies. So our bodies and brainstem are always seeking safety, and they are all about survival. And then when we move up into the limbic system, which is our emotional system, our emotional learning, vigilant system, that's where we feel a sense of belonging or connection or not. So when these two areas are integrated and organized and we feel safe and we feel felt, then we can get to this prefrontal cortex. And right here behind your eyebrows is where we actually have all of the executive functions that we need to live life, to do school, to teach well, to learn. This is where problem solving lives, and emotional regulation, sustained attention, working memory, discernment, our ability to sense time, and to be abstract in our thinking, to have metacognition, all of those we need. But this does not finish developing until late 20s to early 30s. And so our job as parents and community members, when we sit beside children and youth, we want to give our children and youth an opportunity to exercise these, because the brain is an experience-dependent organ. So I want to speak to you a little bit today of some new research, and trauma is not just about the brain at all. A couple of years ago, if I had been presenting with Michael in this time, I would have just talked about the psychological implications of trauma. But we know that trauma and adversity, which happens on a continuum, are body sensations, which we call implicit memory. So trauma and adversity land in the right centric areas of the limbic system and in the body. And we are actually taking in below the waterline of consciousness 11 million bits of sensory information a second. 11 million bits. We cannot process that consciously. What we do process is 6 to 50 bits of explicit information. So the point for all of us is that during COVID, even before COVID, when we are living in chronic levels of unpredictability, or we are experiencing toxic levels of stress, information is coming in from the nervous system, coming in from the environment into the nervous system, or coming in from the internal environment to the nervous system in ways that are too much, too fast, and too soon. And so we can't process that. And that's where we see behaviors go awry, because we can get triggered by the way something sounds, or by the way something smells, or by the way someone looks, or the way a piece of clothing, those are things that aren't in our conscious memory, but they can trigger a child and they can trigger us. So the body remembers what the mind forgets. And I love this saying, if you want to know the way the wind is blowing, look at the sand. And if you want to know how a child is feeling, look at her body. So what we're understanding is that adverse childhood experiences, which the largest public health study ever in the world was in the mid-90s. But since the original adverse childhood experience study, there have been hundreds. And adversities impact the developing brain and body. And so we may not have conscious memory of those experiences, but it's not just individual adversities, it's also these paired ACEs or layers of adversities. So this diagram here shows how, when Michael talked about collective trauma, that is an adversity that we are all experiencing collectively. Historical trauma, racial trauma, institutional trauma, generational trauma, all of these are at the root of, and so our children, many of us are carrying these adversities at a non-conscious level that are generation after generation. We can actually track trauma and adversity. Right now, looking at it, we see 4 generations, but there are questions at the University of Minnesota that they're looking at 14 generations of trauma. So COVID has produced the 3 conditions that the brain cannot take well at all. And the very first one is chronic unpredictability. The second condition is isolation. And the third condition is emotional and physical restraint. So what these 3 conditions have in common are, many of these are the conditions that wear and tear on brain development, meaning that we can see cell death and the breaking apart of synapses in the brain when these conditions are present. So I want to share this with you. This is just kind of like this 3D. I'm speaking about the brain very schematically. The brain doesn't work like this. It doesn't work in sections. But Dr. Bruce Perry says we're on inch 2 of a 3-mile journey or 10-mile journey and what we know about the brain. But for our benefit today, I just want to share with you that this right here in the blue is this prefrontal cortex. And this is the part of the brain that is it's the newest part of the mammalian brain, and it's the newest part of the brain. And so it's not wiring up. It's not creating those sustainable connections. It begins to do that around 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th grade. This is through high school and through college, but this part of the brain is appropriately underdeveloped in contrast to this middle section, which is the limbic system. And we have 2 almond-shaped structures, the amygdala, that are our brain's emotional smoke detector. It's not really accurate anymore to say that that is a fear center. It's a vigilance center. So our amygdala works with the hippocampus. So you can see the amygdala here, and then the hippocampus in here. The hippocampus is the seat of where we process emotional, spatial, and visual memory. We see cell death in this area. In Alzheimer's, that's where initially the brain is experiencing a loss of the synapses. And then down here is the brain stem. And this is really Grand Central Station here for all the stimuli coming in. So many of our children and youth come in, and this area, the brain stem, is overwhelmed with stimuli, and their activation is all in this area. So they are, in that survival brain state. They're in fight, flight, or shut down, and they cannot access this prefrontal cortex. So just an overview, again, very schematic, but I wanted to share this with you. So Michael shared a similar slide, but what we know is that when there are chronic levels of adversity and toxic levels of stress, our brain and body goes from homeostasis to what we call an overload, an allostatic load. And it's where we're living, in this almost new normal of feeling either hyper aroused, hyper vigilant, or hypo aroused, which is really shut down. But more important, this just came out of Harvard last month. Every biological system is affected when we are experiencing times like COVID, and this is what's really important. We're experiencing, our immune system is compromised, our bellies have a brain, and our digestive system, if some of you have been having digestive issues, there is a direct pathway between the microbiome and the limbic system. They're constantly communicating through the bloodstream. It's affecting our heart. And so again, be gentle with yourself, because these times produce just an imbalance in both the brain and body. So here's what we can do. So this is my favorite way to share how adversity and trauma affect us all. We are actually using this in schools with staff. We are giving this chart to principals and to teachers, and they are checking in. Dr. Dan Siegel states that what you can name, you can tame, what's shareable is bearable. So down here is in the social engagement system is the prefrontal cortex. This is when we are feeling peaceful and calm. Then we become a little irritated and agitated, maybe annoyed, and we bump up here into, so now we move into survival brain. So the limbic system is activated. And then if we are continually becoming dysregulated into feelings of panic or fear or anger, then we are in a full-on fight flight. This is called the sympathetic pathway. It's when our heart rate goes up, our blood pressure goes up, and our respiration goes up. And that is damaging when we are living there, because our brains and bodies are built to continually try as hard as they can to return to homeostasis. And so that's the resiliency that Michael was speaking about. But when there are sensations and feelings of that chronic adversity, many of us, instead of this normal purple line being here, where many of us function on most days, many of our students, our own children and youth, our families, many of us find that this has become our normal. This is a very different pathway. We don't want to talk about fight, flight, freeze altogether. Fight, flight is one pathway. Shut down, frozen is a very different pathway of the autonomic nervous system. It's the parasympathetic response, and it's where our heart rate and blood pressure lower, respiration lowers. And so we begin to conserve energy just to stay alive. Many of our children that we see kind of disappear from us sometimes. We see them not turning in work at school. We see high absenteeism. We see kind of just a shutdown, very, not much engagement. This is one we're giving to students. So we are moving away from talking about behaviors. Our kids are learning, our 4-year-olds at St. Mary's and Early Learning Indiana are beginning to talk about their brain and body states. We're not talking about behaviors. We are talking about oh my gosh, sweetie, you came in your amygdala today. So how can we get you to your cortex? One of the things I did not share with you at the beginning is I'm back in the schools. I have been for 7 years. I have a course release from the university. So 2 days a week, a morning and an afternoon, or 2 full mornings. I am in a large public school district. This year, a brand new school in Lawrence Township in Indianapolis, and I'm with 3rd and 4th grade classrooms. So everything I'm sharing with you today is the work that we are doing, co-teaching, and we are teaching our students about their brains and neuroanatomy. So one of the things that we are understanding, and this is critical for us to know as parents in our place of work, is that our brains and body states are contagious. Human beings are contagious. Our emotions are contagious. And knowing that, what we now know is that when I'm calm and I'm feeling grounded and balanced, I can calm a child who is anxious, angry, or dysregulated. But if I am dysregulated and I am rough, I cannot calm a dysregulated child. This is from Bruce Perry's, he came to Butler and shared the slide, so I want to give him credit for that. So right out of the womb, we as babies, and actually in the last trimester, this is new research, in that last trimester, babies sense and feel and perceive their outside worlds through the environment of the womb. And as they come into the world, they can also sense and feel and perceive if the world feels safe to them or if the world feels dangerous. These are my nephew and niece, great nephew and niece. My niece, Laura, shared this with me. Actually, Michael and I were in New Jersey when she shared this. I mean, we weren't in New Jersey, but we were presenting this summer. And this is Brooks on the left. This is Avery. They are 8 weeks old. And literally, Avery would not quit crying. She'd been crying for over an hour. And Brooks, Laura just needed a deep breath. So she laid Avery down. Brooks looked at her, and Brooks took her little hand and she immediately calmed. This is co-regulation. And we come into the world with the ability to calm another, but we have to have those experiences because the brain is experience dependent. It is a historical organ, and it acts much more like a muscle than it is an organ. So whatever we put in front of it, it gets a workout. I love this slide. It's from a group that I'm not aware of, but I'm sharing this now when we're sharing our calm with another. And Michael actually he had shared this on social media. And so I'm really using this now because down here with pity, moving up the spectrum of empathy is where we begin to sit beside or join up with others to share our brain and body state. So I'm sorry for you is really not connecting. It's not a touch point where we are feeling empathic resonance with another. I feel for you is a step closer, but that again, we're moving into that place where we want to look at empathy, whereas I feel with you. And that's when we can feel valued, seen, felt, and heard by another. But at the top is compassion. And I wrote about this in my first book, Compassionate Presence. And I think this is really what we are all being called to not do, but to be in this time. Because when I am moved by you and you are moved by me, we are sharing this beautiful landscape of attachment. And really, it's not anything we do to each other, but it is sharing that presence of connection. So whether you're parenting or you're teaching, this is another template that we're using in the schools. Really, again, not talking about behavior, talking about brain and body state. So when there's a disagreement or a conflict with an adult and a student, with a parent and a child, or child to child, when we're calm, then we look at this and we circle or color in the area of the brain that's activated. And you can see my choice was because my brain and body were telling me, but my friends or the adult's brain and body was telling them what I need to do now. And so this is just a really, once we're calm, this is a really good way to name what you can tame. And then at the bottom, we make a plan for the next time where we are functioning from our amygdala and we need to get to the cortex. How am I doing on time? Do I have a couple more minutes? Michael, can you hear me?
Yeah, you have about 8 minutes.
8 minutes? Okay. Okay, I'm gonna take a deep breath. So, so this is what we're using with, I would have had this in my house with my 3 children. We're putting these in classrooms. This is a great reminder about how our physiological needs are really survival needs. And we have one for staff too. So this is the one for students, but we have one for adults. So these are, and if anyone wants one, I can send the PDF to you, but it's really sharing how if you don't feel safe, if you're not drinking enough water, if you're not getting enough sleep, sleep is critical to brain functioning. It's the time when we clear out the debris in the brain and we prime that brain for a fresh start the new morning. And then love and belonging are limbic system needs. So who are the 2 people that you can count on in this time? Do you have connections, people that you trust? We're asking adults this in our buildings. They're creating resiliency partners. And then once again, we feel these, these survival needs being met and these love and belonging needs being met from limbic structures, then we can move to the prefrontal cortex up here and address, okay, now, how do I learn? So down, we have these like practices that we are giving to students and to adults. And they're regulatory practices and they're connection practices. So this is another check-in. I just wanted to show all of you, this is so exciting right now. This is in my new book too, how we're really moving away from behavior and we're really talking about brain function and brain structure with kids. And they're learning how their emotions and their sensations, because sensations are the language of the body, feeling edgy, numb, rough, open, flowing, teary, sharp, dull. You can see how those are different than feelings, but we're aligning both of those so that the kids are identifying their feelings and their sensations together. So touch points are moments of connection. And we've been talking about these touch points as the social synapse. The brain is, one neuron means nothing in the brain. It takes you hundreds of thousands of neurons to remember your own name. So it's the same as with people. We can't survive without each other. And that's why COVID has been so hard on us. And that's why still in the schools with our masks on and social distancing, I'm not feeling very connected. We just don't have the same social synapse with the people we work with and with our children. I mean, we're doing the best we can, but it's really hard. So if we can see behaviors as meaningful and purposeful, because every behavior has a purpose. Behaviors are communicating signals. That's it. We got to look below the signal. There is an accumulation of, again, too much, too fast, too soon, and we can provide that space of safety. So that social synapse sometimes is what we need to give our children in our adolescence. And that social synapse is that point of connection, which we're calling touch points. So why does all of this matter? Why are we talking about this so much this morning? Because up until a few years ago, we thought the brain was immune to inflammation. And what we know today is that when there are chronic levels of systemic trauma, collective trauma, racial trauma, we know right now that the racial disparities, the social disparities that COVID has highlighted are just significant collective ACEs that many families and communities are dealing with too. So inflammation, yep, cortisol and adrenaline can override the brain and body systems, but connecting and using regulatory practices through breath and through movement are so critical for our health. That's why I wanted to show you my website. So you can, these are just showing the power of deep breathing and taking 2 to 3 minutes, breathing in a favorite color, breathing out a worry, breathing in something that you love, a smell, a sound, and breathing out something that is a worry to you. We know that, and right now, Natalia, you're going to laugh, and Joe, I'm looking at the research of Kundalini yoga. It's very different than traditional yoga. And I've been studying it even this past week. We know that when we activate the body through movement, we activate all of the systems, helping to integrate and dampen down that stress response system. We know talking out loud to ourselves is so calming to our nervous system. There's a lot of new research. I do this all the time, not in front of people, but all the time I have a good talking to myself. This is very, very helpful. And then I also want to share how important it is to let go of control. And this is really hard for me. I'm teaching what I need to learn. When we're feeling anxious or overwhelmed and worried, we can lose perspective on what is realistic and what we can control. And that's hard right now. So sometimes when we're feeling rough, we forget to pause and step back and try to find a deeper perspective and let go of what we cannot do anything about. I always know that when I am aligned, when my brain and body, my thoughts and feelings and perceptions are in alignment and I am feeling positive emotion, that is contagious to my own children and to those around me. There's nothing more important than taking care of myself as a parent and as a teacher and as a person in the community, because that has contagion too. So with that, I guess I don't, Michael, do I have any time left or no?
Just about, I'd say about 2 minutes.
Okay. So feel free to take a picture of this slide. These are some practices that regulate your nervous system. We have this beautiful 10th cranial nerve called the vagus nerve. It is intimately connected to the autonomic nervous system. And when there is a break on the nerve, like when when you drive down your street and you're almost home and you start to put the brake on as you pull into your driveway, this is what this does. We need a break on the vagus nerve so that we can activate the parasympathetic nervous system, lower our heart rate and our digestion and our blood pressure and our respiration. So this first one's called a cold blast, chewing on ice, splashing cold water on your face. This is something you can share with your students or with your own children. 30 seconds at the end of your shower, cold water, doing deep, slow breathing for a couple of minutes. Omega-3 fatty acids are highly correlated with activating the vagus nerve brake. 5 minutes of a walk. You don't have to go to the gym 3 times a week for 3 full hours. Humming, very regulating. I was just talking with a pediatrician yesterday about the effects of humming and gargling, even if you're drinking water. Singing, just so important. A foot massage, all of these things can activate the vagus nerve. So I'm going to end there because I do want to end with this. Nonverbal communication is critical. Your tone is 38% of your communication. Your body language and posture is 55%, which leaves only about 7% left for words. So if our emotions are contagious, how do we make sure that we are infecting people with the right ones? And it happens through our tone. It happens through our gestures and postures. We read people from the eyes up, and it happens when we have worked hard to calm and regulate ourselves. So on my website, I knew I wouldn't get to these. There are YouTube videos of these, how you can use these at home and in the classroom. They are ways that we start the morning in a class. It's brain aligned bell work, or, you know, how you can work as a family together or as an organization. Those are as much for adults as they are for children. So this is my contact information. I know this was super fast, but please feel free to email me at Butler. There's my website, my Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. So feel free to take a picture of this, and then I will stop sharing my screen here, and we'll come back.
Lori, thank you. That was incredible information. I wish that I had benefited from that many years ago when I was a young mother and you know, person in the workforce. I think I could have done a much better job. But with that, Michael, thank you as well for your presentation.
Yeah,
But now,
just real quick, Vicki.
yes,
I do want to let all parents out there know about something called rupture and repair. It's completely normal to rupture relationships with our kids. You can't do parenting perfectly. The key, though, is that repair response. And many of the activities Lori shared with us is about the repair. And even as our kids get to be older now, in our other relationships, we're going to rupture some of the times in any relationship we have. But when we do, we want to remind ourselves to make those repairs, and that's what really creates resiliency. Just had to say that because we beat ourselves up too much.
thank you, Michael. It's good to know. With that, I'm very pleased and really looking forward to our panel of you know, local business people, very respected individuals in each of their industries. And Joe, I'm going to turn the program over to you to introduce our panel. And with that, look forward to everything that they're going to share with us.
Thank you, Vicki. Hello, everyone. My name is Joe Faldetta from Cape Assist. Lori, Dr. Lori, I just did want to share that I am actually conducting my own research as well, not with Kundalini Yoga, but with Hostess Twinkies. And I am finding a really positive improvement in my mood from that as well. It triggers a dopamine release as well that seems to be very calming to me, but probably
it's the cream on the inside. So save the cat. It's not the outside. It's the cream.
It's the inside. So just stick a straw in there and I'll get the same effect. You've done the research as well.
I have.
So by my opening comments, you can probably guess that we've put a panel together of three brilliant ladies, all working in organizations of varying sizes. And we have three brilliant people on the panel, which will hopefully make up for my lack of brilliance. So I will thank the ladies in advance for that. So on our panel, we have Laura Bishop from Laura Bishop Communications, who will be representing our smaller businesses. We have Moira McMahon Primus from the McMahon Insurance Agency, representing our mid-sized businesses. And we have Becky Guerrasio from Crest Savings Bank, representing one of our larger employers in the county. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start kind of our Q&A and panel today by asking each of our panelists a question. And then, I mean, I can certainly ask you ladies questions for hours, but after I kind of ask each one of you a question, I would like to open the program up to our participants for any questions that they may like to ask based on the experiences that you're having. Working with your employees and running your businesses as successfully as you are in this climate of a pandemic and chronic uncertainty. So Laura Bishop from Laura Bishop Communications, if it's okay if I start with you first.
Okay.
This new normal is not really that abnormal for you, because you've been working remotely since you launched Laura Bishop Communications back in 2011, and that business model has been really successful for you as you've continued to grow your business. So what has kind of been the advantage of that business model through this pandemic? And then have you had any needs to make adjustments or improvements to that model in light of the pandemic?
Thanks, Joe. The advantage has been that we were already set up with home offices, and whenever you join, anybody who's joined our firm already understood that you worked remotely. So everybody we work independently, but the challenge has been, well, the challenge that has always been either bringing a new employee on board, or anybody who's interned with us or is just an entry-level employee. They've never had the advantage. If you're working in an office, you learn kind of through osmosis, right? Or you're able to exchange ideas very quickly with each other. We have to be very intentional about keeping in touch with each other, and especially with an intern or young employee, mentoring is a challenge. And what we had done as the firm has grown, now we're 8, we would meet every 2 weeks as a firm, all of us, for a couple of hours, often over lunch. We just made time to meet, exchange ideas every 2 weeks. Well, that changed. What came out of it, though, we weren't using, believe it or not, Zoom before. We had a conference call line, but we weren't meeting via Zoom. Now we do that regularly. And I actually think we're doing it, I know we're doing it more often than we were before. So there's more of an exchange among all of us. I think that's been something very positive that's come out of it. But it's also been, as the stress level has increased, it's how often do you keep in touch and just check in with everybody. So we've just been very aware of checking in, and it's not just me checking in, it's all of us checking in with each other.
So, several things. One, I mean, the utilization of Zoom as a tool, I think, is something that many of us are wondering how we got along with before. And it is interesting that, you kind of bring up some positives, as Dr. Lori and Michael kind of share. Our brains are kind of wired for a negative bias. And with the unpredictability of this pandemic, there are a lot of negatives with the lack of physical connection that we have. But there were some positives that came out of it too. And it seems like that for your agency, your employees are really making that conscious effort to check in with each other, and are actually doing that more now than they were before.
Right. And you know what, we're still having a lot of fun with it. I mean, early on, did something with all of our pets. And so and we've been more, I think everybody has to be more understanding that you may be interrupted by a pet or a child, and, just sort of keep it in perspective.
Well, I hope everyone maintains that understanding on this particular meeting, as I have both of my kids at home and my pet. And I'm really hoping for the next 23 minutes that I am not interrupted. So thank you very much, Laura. I do appreciate that. What I'd like to do now is ask Moira. You're working for a little bit larger of an organization with more employees, and with more employees, you have different needs for different employees. So how do you balance the needs of employees with dependents at home, with those who don't have any such, I'm sure you have employees that have younger children or single employees, and not everybody's needs are the same. So even though we can't treat everybody the same, how do you make sure that you're treating everybody fairly?
Challenge, Joe, I will say, but we've always been very compassionate employers. We like to think we're very compassionate. We consider ourselves a family, and so the folks who are dealing with their children or their dependents with homeschooling, they are kind of working and juggling, as so many are. And then how I would answer any criticisms from people who are not in that situation is that you recognize the benefits of working for a compassionate employer, and you know that if you find yourself in a situation with a parent or someone who needs some extra care and extra time, you're going to get the same treatment from us. It may just not be right now. If we're going to be here for you, whatever those needs are. And also, we have to work with our younger employees with children at home, because if they choose to leave, if they can't do the job and they leave, then we're all kind of stuck with a lot more work and a whole different situation to deal with.
So the values of your organization kind of going into this of, you know, being a family and wanting to be compassionate, but then also sharing that with your employees where they sort of understand, kind of say like the team aspect of it, right? Like if we're not going to kind of take care of each other and we're not going to be compassionate to our fellow coworkers that sort of have these needs, then ultimately the consequence of that is we're going to lose some good people, and that's going to be more work for all of us.
Right. Exactly. And our staff, our talent is like it's our biggest currency. When they're happy and firing on all cylinders, our client base is happy and successful. So we just have to set them up so that we can all move forward.
Yeah, that's a really an amazing point, and I think it's something that I kind of go back to. I believe that Michael and Lori have mentioned sometimes when we talk about, do our values match our policies, right? Do we just have these policies for the sake of having policies, or do they really match the values that we have as individuals, or the values that we have as an organization? And it seems like your organization's values are what has enabled you to be successful during a really difficult and unpredictable time.
Yeah, we've been through it in the past with different situations, Hurricane Sandy being one of them. So we just sort of we know that we have to sort of roll with what comes at us and do our best for our people.
Thank you so much.
Sure, thank you.
Becky, I'd like to ask you next, because you're working for one of our larger employers, and when that happens, there has you know, you're dealing with a couple different sets of values. You're kind of dealing with your company's values and approach to this, and then there's also your own personal approach as a supervisor and a manager, and how you deal with your employees. Can you maybe talk to us a little bit about, you know, your company's approach and then maybe your own personal approach?
Sure. So our company started a parents focus group as part of this to really understand the variables that we were dealing with, because it is such an individualized situation for everyone, so that we could collaborate with those individuals on creative solutions to accommodate their needs and ensure effective communication with them. It had a side benefit of creating kind of a community among those coworkers of parents that, you know, maybe could get some tips and tricks from each other. And then from that, we created a framework that took in to account the flexibility of the different roles that we had in our organization. You know, whether somebody was able to work remotely, or, you know, we work 7 days we are open 7 days a week. So whether somebody could work the weekend, if they could work a flex schedule, we really try to do that to minimize the burden on the employees and their coworkers, and be fair as well to the company. And then, of course, we within that framework, we also took advantage of our federal, state, and company benefits, including the Employee Assistance Program, making sure everybody knew about that and those resources that were there, to really help keep everybody financially whole and help them with their work-life integration. I don't know that there's much balance right now. But then we took that framework and we created a plan with each individual and their manager to make sure that it was a balanced and fair, all the way around kind of plan. But the most important thing that we found is frequent and regular communication. So we now have a regular all-employee meeting. We used to just meet with officers. We now meet with all employees. We also are trying to be more conscious, like Michael said, to check in with our people and ask them, how are you doing? How can I support you? How can I help you be more productive, before we're asking them, what have you done for me? Those sorts of things. So, and the most important thing I would say, from really anybody's perspective, but especially if you're working remotely, is to set boundaries for yourself. Protect that time, whatever time you need to protect it. Set a clear stopping point each day, and take breaks, like Lori said, even those couple of minutes just to breathe and get a glass of water, or to call that coworker that you don't see anymore and have that water cooler moment on the phone or over Zoom. To do those things is really important for our social emotional capacity.
And I think we're hearing some of that common themes about communication and just the time to kind of check in with everybody. But I really appreciate what you're saying about having those boundaries. I think that so often, we have many different roles in our lives. We're parents, we're employees, we're children, aunts, uncles, cousins, whatever it may be. And pre-COVID, we had boundaries to those roles, and we went to work and we were in an office, and that's when we were an employee, and then we got home and COVID is sort of, with every people working from home, it's you're all things all the time, right? So it's not kind of, I like what you said about sort of maintaining those boundaries. When does work stop? When do I take time for self-care and all those things that are important? So I can have I'm taking care of my own mental and physical health. So.
And having somebody there, whoever your support system is, creating that support system to really hold you accountable to those things too.
And I think what's great, the kind of the first thing that you talked about was that idea of the parents focus group and just kind of talking. And it seems like your organization spend a lot of time kind of meeting with employees and kind of understanding what their needs were and kind of creating a plan to kind of move forward for them, which I think is in business, we often do that with our customers and our clients. We try to reach out to them and check in to make sure that we're meeting needs. But I think it's wonderful that you kind of took that same approach with your employees.
Absolutely. It's people first, whether they're customers or employees.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And what I would like to do is I'd like to give our members an opportunity to ask some questions. If anybody would like to type a question in the chat that they would like to propose to the panel, if you would just like to ask your question, if you want to go ahead and raise your hand or just wave at the camera, and Vicky can then go ahead and unmute you and you can ask a question to our panel. Does anybody have a question that they would like to ask?
I know also if anyone has a question of Dr. Lori or Michael, we can open up to questions for them as well as any of the panelists.
Oh, I see June has her hand up. June, would you like to ask a question? I don't know if you have the ability to unmute. Oh,
there we go. I guess I just want to ask, I'm lucky to work for Crest Savings, who is so supportive. What I struggle with is the personal guilt. Having two kids, I'm used to, prior to COVID, I would give 110% to my job. And like what you had mentioned, Joe, all things all the time, coming to terms with not being able to do that, so much or well anymore. I guess if anyone has any personal recommendations of how to deal with that internal stress and guilt that we are faced with.
Well, I'll just say personally, before I kind of open it up to our panel, just the counselor in me says that you may have a faulty underlying belief there that you're not doing things well. This is a really, really difficult time, and we are all things at all times. And Dr. Lori, a lot will talk about sort of our perspective, and I would say that I bet you if you took a step back and looked at all the positive things that you're able to do and that you're to accomplish under very difficult circumstances, you'll find that there's probably a lot of resiliency there and a lot to be proud of what you're accomplishing. So one of my favorite quotes is from Robin Roberts, who is the anchor on Good Morning America. And she always says, optimism's like a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets. And sometimes we just kind of have to turn and find that positive. So with that, I'll say, would anyone like from our panel or Lori or Mike like to kind of jump in and offer some perspective on that?
I think, June, a lot of it's about adjusting your expectations and dialing back your work ethic a little bit. When I feel like when your office is steps across the room from the kitchen or the living room, you feel compelled to jump in there when outside of work hours and give more. I know we've told our people, you need to dial it back and set those cutoff times, as Becky said, and focus on your family and your kids. And the converse of that is it's hard when there's nowhere to go. You want to take vacation, but where are you going to go? What are you going to do? And that's another thing we've kind of had to force people to say, like, you need to take your time, use your time, even if it's just for a down day and you're not really going anywhere. But it's a conscious effort that you have to reshift the way you do things.
Thank you for that. Anyone else like to share some insight on that before we kind of take our next question?
Well, I do. I actually think that one of our senior account manager, she did mention, and I didn't even realize how much my response meant to her, was in August finally, and she has college, one just graduated from college and one is a sophomore. And so dealing with concerns about COVID, one tested positive at some point. So like dealing with that stress for her. So she did indicate that she sent me a Monday morning email and said, I'm taking a beach day today. And I said, yay, have lots of fun because I won. And she's very hard on herself. I mean, she's her worst critic and she works so hard. And I was so thankful that she finally said, yeah, I'm just gonna take the day and please don't. And I didn't want her to check in, just get out and get some. So June, I'll bet you work as hard and are probably as hard on yourself. So, so many of us have this very high bar. So I love that Mara said, kind of dial back your work ethic, because you don't hear that too often, but you sort of have to.
Yeah,
absolutely. I know that you work so hard and you do need to dial back that work ethic a little bit, because you just had a newborn at home and you have another daughter who's 2, and you also, you just came back from leave, so you just sent them off to daycare for the first time. So not to share all your business, but you need to dial it back and give yourself a break, because you are enough. And we're required to work 8 hours a day. We're not required to work 10 or 15 or whatever you is your normal. And take a break from the devices too. It's hard to do, but I've found myself, I was one to work through lunch before this. I now take a lunch and I don't take any devices with me, because you get this hyper-focused mentality when you're remotely working. And it's really good to take that time for yourself. So do that.
All right, thank you, everyone. So I think to sum up everything, June, you're doing great.
Joe, there's a question. I think is it Princess? Do you have a question or comment?
You need to unmute her. Yeah, there she is. Okay.
Can you hear me?
I can.
Yeah, I did find Dr. Lori's slide very interesting. If there's a way we can get that slide, I can get that slide. And also, she mentioned something about COVID and 3 effects about being emotionally and physically restrained, and also isolation and chronic something. I didn't grab that point. Yeah. I just think, I gotta.
Yeah, so those are the conditions that the brain and body really struggle with. And the first one is chronic unpredictability. Okay. So just that ongoing unpredictability. And then isolation is the second condition, and emotional and physical restraint. And I will share these slides. I actually, for the very first time, Michael, you'll be so proud, I made that was my shortened PowerPoint.
Great.
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
you're
I
so
like
welcome.
that.
And Dr. Laurie, if I could just follow up for a quick moment. I heard you say this once, and I don't want to quote it incorrectly, but I believe that you said that when a brain is in crisis, it asks 3 questions. And I'm not sure if I have it correct, but is it, when will this be over? Who can I trust? And am I safe? Is that
Yep.
right?
That's it. That's it. You remembered those. Yeah. And that's a survival response. That's just all about safety and connection, because you can't think problem solving. So yeah, Joe, thank you for bringing those up. I need to put those in my slides.
Well, I think about because, it's become, I think, a joke amongst everyone now on the internet when we say, oh, when COVID is over, right? And, and we kind of laugh because, it's, and if that's what our mind is craving, is like, when will this be over? If that's one of kind of the 3 questions that we're looking to ask, there really is no answer to that, right?
Yep.
And as much too as maybe what we need to do is kind of accept our new normal.
Absolutely. I'll write those in the chat. Thank you, Joe. I got to put those in my slides. Dang
Well,
it.
it was in one of your slides at one point, because I'm a glorified parrot. Nothing I say is anything I've thought of. It's just people that smarter than me had said that I remembered. So that's
All right. I love it.
Does anyone else have a question? I'm just kind of looking around for hands, or if you'd like to type something into the chat. We have about 5 minutes left, so I think we probably have time to take 1 or 2 more questions.
If I can just say, there's 2 screens, and so someone might be visually raising their hand on a screen that, might not be visual to you, Joe, or to me or Nina, that we can't see. So if you're raising your hand, use the raised hand feature, or put your question in the chat, because we don't want to miss you.
As we may be waiting, a couple of things that you just want to emphasize, because I have a few kids of my own, that the human brain really isn't fully developed until age 25 to 30 now. So if you have employees in the summertime, if you're hiring young people, or if you have young people that you're raising and living with, that brain is and that executive function where we do life and where we make good judgments really isn't fully mature until that age, and actually girls a little faster than boys, if you can believe that. So we really want to be aware of that and give ourselves all a little bit of grace at this time. I mean, we're under tremendous pressure. And being able to just, take that deep breath, walk away from something for a bit before we shoot off another email or text is always helpful.
Thank you, Michael. I'm not seeing any questions, so I'll just kind of go forward with one of my own. Laura, you had sort of talked about kind of bringing new employees on in this climate, and that's something that I'm kind of curious about, is if you are in a position where you are bringing on new employees, during this time of working from home, or how do you go about acclimating them to the culture of your agency and training them? What's been successful with bringing on new employees? And I'll kind of ask Laura first, and then open it up to Moira and Becky.
Well, I have to say, 3 of our employees started within the year were not even with us for a full year, and 1 started on March 2nd. So we were a little flying by the seat of our pants, but then we just take the time. Those meetings are helpful, and not just me, but Allison Roberts and my vice president, and then the senior account manager, had already developed guidelines for an employee handbook, and guidelines on how we enter our time in QuickBooks, and just our culture, and shared that with them. And then just sort of keeping in touch was very helpful. We had an intern start in the summer, and so that's a challenge, just to be sure that he's I've never met him in person yet. And I think only one one person on our staff has met him in person so far. So we're hopeful that next week we're going to get together finally outside for a staff meeting, but it's just really constant communications and having, sharing the information that we have available and being very open to questions, and also reassuring them that it's okay to make mistakes and don't feel like you're asking too many questions. But that's how we dealt with it.
So just reassuring, everyone, please ask the questions and have that open line of communication and because there is a difficulty, not just kind of being able to knock on the office next to yours and ask your questions, right? Because we're, having to make that phone call or be more deliberate about it. Moira, have you had any experience during this time of bringing on new employees?
Yes, Joe. We've hired roughly 5 people over the past few months, 3 in our Manahawkin office and then 2 for Ocean City. And it worries me that they're missing out on the culture and what makes, the office environment special and how that helps when you come on board a new company. And additionally, one is very seasoned in the insurance business. So I'm pretty confident in her ability to hit the ground running. Several employees are newer to the industry and they're younger. And I just remember how I felt when I was in my 20s first starting out, and you bring a different kind of feel to a job when you're just starting out. And so I do worry a little bit that they won't, they may want to leave and go somewhere else. And so it's a challenge. That definitely is one of the more challenging things that we're dealing with.
And I'm sure with an organization like yours, where one of I'm sure the big benefits of working there is the culture and the values of that organization. They may not be getting that full experience, that full understanding of what a great place to work it is.
Yeah, and they're not going to kind of perceive that as much as you would when you're in the office, like I said. And we're really like pushing the communication front, just having meetings with the whole office, having department meetings, lots of one-on-ones, that kind of thing, like Laura said too. That really, I think, will help.
Well, then I think just to kind of bring our panel to a close for today, because I see that we're almost out of time, I'll just ask Becky, have you had some experience during this time of trying to bring on new employees and sort of onboarding them to your procedures at the bank?
Yes, we just recently, really, we brought on 2 new employees, one in the branch system. So that's a little bit easier because it's kind of business as usual there. So they are able to have some of those same touch points that they would ordinarily have in their onboarding, and one in the loan department. And I do know that his manager took the route, or his managers took the route of being in person for that training period. Now he is more seasoned professional, so that helps a little bit, as you said, but again, providing our people with the communication tools that they need to kind of add those touch points in and really surround people even when they may be apart has been helpful.
Great, well, thank you. And I think with that kind of brings me to the end of my time. I apologize if there are any questions that I didn't get to. The beauty of being me is I have many flaws. It's kind of what makes me me. So thank you all for your time, and I really do appreciate it. And I appreciate having the opportunity to be a part of this panel. So thank you.
Joe, thank you. Everyone. You did a great job. Maura, Becky, Laura, thank you so much for joining us as panelists. And to everyone who tuned in today, we appreciate you being with us. Michael and Lori, thank you for sharing with us your insight on this issue, and your research and your intellect. It's just been so valuable and interesting as how we in the business community can bridge this education and learning and working and helping our staffs and as employees help our children or grandchildren, or whatever the case may be. We're all wearing many, many hats these days. And to our colleagues at the Atlantic City Chamber, the Southern Ocean County Chamber, our sponsor, Nina, thanks for your help on the technology. You're always great. Appreciate that. So anyway, everybody, it's Friday.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye.
Wish everybody
Bye-bye.
a great weekend. Thank you
You too.
all. Have a
See
great
y'all
day.
later.